All right, so ready to dive into Van Gogh.
Always.
I think everyone knows him, at least a little bit.
Yeah.
Starry Night, right? The ear thing.
Yeah, he's definitely a household name.
But for this deep dive, we wanted to go way deeper, like beyond the surface. We've got biographies, art history stuff, even like public opinion polls, to really figure out what makes him so fascinating, even now. You know?
Yeah. And it's interesting because he wasn't always this popular.
Oh, yeah. He really struggled.
Big time.
Okay, so, well, should we start with his early life then?
Sounds good.
So he was born in 1853 in the Netherlands. His dad was a pastor.
Right. So pretty religious upbringing.
And surrounded by nature, too.
Yeah, and that's super important. I mean, later he'd become like the guy for landscapes, using nature in his art, even in the more abstract stuff. Early on, he was into the Barbizon school.
That's the French landscape painters.
Exactly. They were all about capturing nature, but like really realistically.
So even though his style changed a lot later, that connection to the real world, like, stuck with him.
Totally. Like, it was a foundation. Oh, and we can't forget the old masters. Huge influence on Van Gogh's early work.
Oh, yeah. Like who?
Rembrandt, Frans Hals, those guys.
Really?
Yeah, you can totally see it, like the way he used light and shadow. Even in his early portraits, it's there.
Wow. I never made that connection. Huh. So he's got this foundation, right? But then things get kind of complicated. We have to talk about the mental health stuff. It's a big part of his story.
Right, but we don't want to get into the cliches about it.
No, definitely not.
We're not, like, romanticizing mental illness or anything. I mean, it caused him huge suffering.
Yeah.
It affected his relationships, his work, his whole ability to just function. And the world back then wasn't exactly understanding.
Not at all.
One thing that really comes across in his letters is how it affected his art. Sometimes he couldn't paint at all.
Wow.
And sometimes it led to these bursts of creative energy. It's really striking.
And through it all, he had his brother, Theo. Talk about support systems.
Curiously, everyone needs a Theo.
Right.
He was so important emotionally, financially. I mean, he believed in Vincent when nobody else did. He was the one who connected him to the art world in Paris, actually.
That's right. Paris, 1886.
Yep.
That's where things get really interesting.
It is. This is where he meets the Impressionists, Monet, Renoir, all the big names. And his style totally changes, like radically. Brighter colors, thicker brushstrokes, this more expressive way of capturing light and movement. It's like a whole new world opened up to him. Imagine seeing an Impressionist painting for the first time.
Yeah.
That vibrancy, that energy, that's what he was feeling.
Like seeing the world in high def, suddenly.
Exactly.
So Paris was huge for him. But then he moves on to Arles in 1888.
Yeah.
What was he looking for there?
He was looking for something specific, I think. Intense light, vibrant colors, and a sense of community. He wanted to start an artist's colony. Yeah. Where, like-minded artists could work together, inspire each other.
Like a creative collective.
Yeah.
Kind of like what we have today.
Totally. And it's in Arles where he paints some of his most famous works. Sunflowers, Starry Night, those images you see everywhere.
On mugs, T-shirts, everything.
Exactly.
Up at Starry Night, I read that the sky, the swirls, it might actually be a pretty accurate depiction of some kind of turbulent airflow.
Oh, that's right.
I mean, how cool is that? Science and art, centuries before anyone else was doing it.
It's amazing. Some researchers think he was, tapping into real-world phenomena, whether he knew it or not. And that's what's so fascinating about him, right? He was so grounded in nature, but also willing to, push the boundaries of how he represented it.
Yeah. But even in Arles, even with all the amazing art he was making, the mental health struggles continued.
Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. And this is what leads to the ear incident. It was a really tragic moment, a turning point, but for the worse, sadly. It's important to remember, the context back then, right? Mental health care was, vastly different. But even with all that going on, he was so prolific in Arles.
You were talking about Sunflowers, Starry Night, all those. What do, art historians say about them now? What makes them so popular even today?
Well, his use of color is a big one. It's just so striking. He wasn't afraid to just use pure, vibrant colors straight from the tube, which was kind of revolutionary back then.
Really?
Yeah, it was. And his paintings have this emotional intensity. It really draws you in. You can almost feel like his passion, his struggles, everything.
Some people describe it as like almost violent, the intensity.
That's interesting. Yeah, there's definitely this energy, this raw power. And the brushstrokes even. Like look at Wheatfield with crows, for example. The sky, the wheat, even the crows, it's all so full of movement, emotion. And a lot of art historians see it as like a reflection of what was going on in his head at the time. The darkness, the turmoil.
Okay, so we have this incredibly innovative artist struggling with all this stuff, making these masterpieces that still resonate today. But he wasn't famous back then, was he?
No, not at all. He sold very few paintings, actually, and really struggled to get any recognition. He was seen as an outsider, too radical, too different. And tragically, he died thinking he was a failure.
That's so sad. So how did he become this icon then? Everyone knows him now.
It's actually a really fascinating story. Posthumous fame, I guess you could call it.
Okay.
After he died, his brother, Theo, he worked so hard to promote Vincent's art.
Wow.
And slowly, the art world started to pay attention. The critics, they started praising his vision, his use of color, that emotional depth.
So it was really Theo who made him famous.
He played a huge role, absolutely. I mean, without Theo's dedication, his belief in his brother, Van Gogh might have just been forgotten. It makes you wonder how many other amazing artists throughout history just never got noticed because they didn't have a champion like that.
That's a good point. But at least with Van Gogh, there's kind of a happy ending. I mean, he's recognized now.
Yeah, definitely. And today, his paintings are some of the most valuable in the world. People travel all over just to see them, to experience them in person. And his influence is everywhere. He can see it in so many artists who came after him.
You mentioned influence. He's considered like a major influence on expressionism, abstract expressionism, all that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Those movements really took off in the early 20th century, and they have a lot of similarities with Van Gogh's work. The way he expressed emotions, used bold colors, distorted forms, and that move away from traditional realistic painting.
Can you give an example for those of us who aren't like art experts?
Sure. Think of Edvard Munch, the painter who did The Scream. You can totally see Van Gogh's influence there. Those swirling brushstrokes, that intense emotionalism. Or even Jackson Pollock, the American artist who dripped and poured paint onto his canvases. He wasn't trying to depict anything realistically, but to express pure emotion, energy, which is something Van Gogh was doing decades earlier.
So when we see a modern painting and it hits us in the feels, it might be because of Van Gogh.
Exactly. He totally changed how we see and experience art. And there's actually something else about his work that's really interesting.
Okay, what's that?
So remember how we talked about his use of color, especially all the yellows and blues? Well, some researchers think it might be connected to a neurological condition called xanthopsia.
Wait, are you saying Van Gogh literally saw the world differently?
It's a theory, but a fascinating one. Xanthopsia can change how you perceive color, making things look more yellow, greenish. It can be caused by certain medications, illnesses. We can't know for sure if he had it, but it's definitely a possibility. And it makes you think about his work in a whole new way, the connection between art and perception.
That's amazing. It's
Yeah.
like we're peeling back layers of the onion here. It just keeps getting more and more interesting. Sunflowers and that ear thing to impasto, revolutionary techniques, and now maybe even a neurological explanation for his art.
And that's what makes deep dives like this so cool, right? You go beyond the surface, the myths, the legends, and you discover something much richer, more nuanced. Van Gogh was a complicated guy, brilliant artist, troubled soul, and his work is still sparking conversations, inspiring people, centuries later.
I think it's powerful that he could take all his struggles, all those intense emotions, and turn them into something beautiful, meaningful. And that connects with people no matter when they lived.
Exactly. It speaks to something universal in us, that shared human experience, the joy, the pain, the search for meaning.
It really makes you think about art and how it can transcend time, connect us to something bigger than ourselves.
Totally. That's why it's so important to keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep digging deeper, There's always more to learn, more to discover. That's what makes it exciting.
Okay, so we've talked about his life, the good, the bad, the art. But I'm curious, what do people actually think about Van Gogh and he's this huge icon, but what is it about him that still fascinates people?
Well, we have some interesting data on that, actually. from public opinion polls. And one thing that keeps coming up is the emotional impact of his work. People are really drawn to the honesty, the vulnerability you see in his paintings.
Yeah.
It's like he's inviting you into his world.
I get that. Like, it can be kind of overwhelming sometimes, that intensity.
And that's part of what makes him so unique, right? He wasn't afraid to show those emotions, even the dark ones, which was pretty unusual back then. And I think that really resonates with people today, you know, in a world where we're often told to hide our true feelings.
So it's like he's giving us permission to, like, really feel things, even if they're not always happy feelings.
Exactly. And I think that's pretty powerful.
It is. It's amazing to think that someone who struggled so much could create such beautiful, inspiring work.
It is. And his story reminds us that, you know, recognition, appreciation, it can come at any time, even after we're gone.
I guess the important thing is to stay true to yourself, your vision, even if not everyone gets it.
Totally. Van Gogh is like the ultimate example of that, right? Perseverance, staying true to your art no matter what.
Well, I think we've really covered a lot today, from, you know, his early life to becoming this global icon. Sunflowers, swirling skies, thick paint, maybe even seeing the world differently. What's your biggest takeaway from all this? From really going deep on Van Gogh?
I think for me, it's that reminder that art can be so much more than just something pretty to look at. It can be a window into someone's soul, a way to connect with something bigger than ourselves. It can be a force for change, a source of beauty, inspiration, all of it.
I love that. I think that's a perfect way to end this. So to everyone listening, I hope this has inspired you to maybe explore Van Gogh a little more. Visit a museum, read his letters, or even just spend some time with one of his paintings and let it speak to you.
Yeah, and remember, you don't have to be an art expert to appreciate him. Just let yourself feel the emotions, the energy, that raw beauty. You might be surprised what you discover.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of Vincent van Gogh. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep those creative sparks flying.